Monday, July 12th, 2021. It is now 7:01. The Board of Education makes available at least one current copy of the Open Meetings Act, which is posted on the west wall of the meeting room and accessible to members of the public. Would you now stand with me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first off, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 approve the consent agenda as presented, including approval of minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting on June 14, 2021, approval of the proposed accounts for payment, approval of budgetary receipts and expenditures for June 2021, approval of Committee of the Whole minutes June 24, 2021, approval of option students, approval of contracts for 2021-2022, for Bailey Zarbanicki Elementary Physical Education and Faith Bokelman Middle School Social Studies, approval of the Superintendent's Contract Addendum for the 2021-2022 school year, and approval of the Emergency Operation Plan.
All right, I have a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Eric. All right, first up, Jason had a comment on the budget.
Just as usual, a quick treasurer's report update. The end of June represents us being 10/12 of the way, or 83.3% of the way through the current budget cycle. That means we have 2 months remaining. The June treasurer's report showed expenditures of bills at $503,857, payroll at $1,676,771, for total expenditures of $2,180,629. Revenue for the month was $2,548,950, so that's good. Our revenue was more than our expenditures, which typically at this time of the year it's the other way around, because we stop, well, in July and August, we will stop receiving state aid, so we would anticipate that will fluctuate a little bit. We also know that we haven't received all of the IDEA or other grants that we have submitted application for, and that's just a simply a timing thing between the Department of Education approving those and those being sent back to us. So hopefully we'll remain in balance and finish out the last 2 months of the budget cycle. Year to date, just of note that I typically don't talk about year to date expenses, but this was a good time to bring those up. Year to date expenses are $19,748,682, and revenue is $22,628,382. So that shows that in terms of our expenses, we are being fiscally responsible and maintaining a positive revenue expenditure balance.
Anybody have any comments or questions about his budget report? All right, hearing none. Can I have your votes, please? All right, that is approved with 7 votes. Next up, outstanding recognition, Mr. Alexander.
Okay, a couple of things. A couple people tonight. Neither one of them are in presence because they're both very shy and don't like to be recognized for what they've done over the course of their career. We have talked about them already this year, so in emailing them, they both said, yeah, we're probably not going to be there, but you can go ahead and say a few nice things about us. So first of all, I would just like to, we have plaques for the 2 administrators who are retiring. Mr. John Jarash, in appreciation for his 22 years of dedicated service as an administrator for Beatrice Public Schools. He's recognized and will be presented with the plaque. We will miss Mr. Jarash for several reasons. One, because he's been a terrific middle school principal in being able to connect with kids and staff, and he's been a person who has been able to work in a middle school environment, which if you've ever been around middle school kids, which when I used to be a 6th grade teacher, takes a special kind of person to do that. He's done that consistently for many years, 22 total at Beatrice Public Schools, and it never ends that in our administrative team meetings when we need a moment of levity, you can always count on Mr. Jarash for that. So We will miss him. We thank him for his dedication to our school and to the service of the youth of Beatrice over the past 22 years. The second administrator that we recognize this evening also is very shy, although he's out in the public very much, and you will see him at almost every event that our kids hold, and that's Mr. Neil Randall, Athletic Director and Assistant Principal at the high school, in appreciation for 14 years of dedicated service as an administrator for Beatrice Public Schools. In July 2021, he officially steps down, and we want to recognize him for his unselfish dedication to the students and student athletes here at Beatrice Public Schools. In his position, many people don't understand that an athletic director often starts their day, depending on the weather, could be as early as 4 a.m. in the morning and doesn't end it until 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night. Probably one of the most time-consuming jobs in the district, and for that reason, Mr. Randall is greatly appreciated. I know from personal perspective that when I came, I knew there were more sports here, and I didn't know how many more, how much more time that would involve. But in watching Mr. Randall and how he is so diligent about making sure everything's in order, became very aware of that very quickly. In a personal story, one snowy morning, or one morning when there was a snowstorm about to approach, I sent him a text at about 5 o'clock in the morning anticipating snow for the next day, and didn't expect him to respond, but it was on my mind when I woke up, so I sent him a text, hey, we probably need to talk about what we're going to do with games and teams and so forth. And 2 minutes later, I got a text message back saying I'm already working on it. So that's the kind of confidence that we know we can entrust to Mr. Gus Brown, who's with us tonight in the audience, and we'll introduce him in a minute. But in regards to Mr. Randall, just a person you could always count on. A person you could always count on to be there. A person who is always going to try and work through things with kids, whether it be in the administrative role or the athletic director role. And we greatly appreciate his 14 years of service at Beatrice Public Schools. So thank you to both of those gentlemen, and we wish them well in the next venture in life.
All right, thank you, Jason. Next up, we have the board reports, and we have committee of the whole. Mrs. Martin.
The Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting was held on Thursday, June 24th. One of the discussion items was about early childhood education, and Director Missy Timmerman reminded the board that at the preschool they have 9 teachers who all have early childhood unified degrees. And when the preschool is at full enrollment, they can house 120 4-year-olds and 102 3-year-olds. She said they currently have 7 4-year-olds and 19 3-year-olds on the waiting list. She also talked to the board about the fact that they've been awarded a grant that could have been used for an additional 4-year-old classroom, but they had not received one application for the position. The board encouraged her to continue to search for a teacher. And she also gave some information about the 6-pence program and that she was working on a grant for that. Mr. Alexander gave us an update on the Beatrice Public Schools Health Standards development process. He informed the board that when the health standards were released earlier this year, the district reviewed them internally and determined the need to develop our own standards based upon feedback from K-12 administrators and teachers in the district. The next step will begin with evaluating our current standards and developing our own in conjunction with the area ESU 5 schools. He told us that the district does not legally have to adopt the state standards, but we must have standards to drive the curriculum. And he said he'll keep the board and stakeholders updated about the progress. He also shared the letter he would like to send to the Nebraska Department of Education stating our stance on the concerns regarding the proposed set of health standards. Mr. Alexander then updated the board about the progress of ESSER III funding, and one requirement is a safe return to school plan, and that was due on, or will be due on July 15th. And then he talked about some of the different parts of the plan. He also presented the board with a draft of the safe return plan and said that we'd be reviewing it at tonight's board meeting. He said that, Mr. Alexander also said that NDA is also working on revising Rule 10, and there's multiple changes in the sections. He said our stance on the proposed changes regarding media specialists would be that BPS would continue to operate with 3 media specialists in the district. That ends my report.
Thank you. Did anybody have any comments or questions about Doris's report? All right. Next, we move on to the public forum, citizens' requests and comments section of the meeting. Was there anyone who wished to speak at tonight's meeting?
I will.
Okay.
Running back facing this way.
I don't
I mean,
know.
I'm loud, but I don't think I'm loud.
I don't know why it's like that.
Okay, good. Sabrina Glenn, 1075 Pineview Ridge Lane. Okay, so just a couple things. I got the SAFE plan home and read through it. Talked to some other people in the community, and there's just a couple things I want to point out to you. On page 5, there is the efforts to provide vaccinations to school communities. I totally think that it's great. I don't see a huge issue with it. One of the things that a lot of people are questioning though is if we are going to be offering vaccinations to the kids at school, if they are still going to be required to have a parent's signature. With the talk of a lot of health providers potentially allowing kids to make their own decisions at age 14, that is something that is on the minds of a lot of parents, is we don't want to send our kids to school and then come home with a jab in their arm. So that's something to be aware of and maybe address. And then the last thing here, we have the note, and I know it has to be in there. However, I just want to point out a few things. So the Nebraska Department of Education, quite honestly, is on a crap list right now anyway, because they want to teach first graders that the vagina has elasticity. So I really don't think that their opinion should rank very high when we're talking about our amazing community. When we talk about the CDC, they're completely opposite sometimes of what World Health Organization is. So I think that we need to take something that they do and just take it with a grain of salt. I don't think we go in and just say, well, they said it, we're doing it. And then my other issue with that is the public health solutions. Are we following, do we have a local one? Are we going to be speaking locally to our hospital or to members of the community? Or are we going off of public health solutions out of Crete? So those are some certain things that the community is wanting to know. And I know, Doris, you had said at the committee of the whole meeting, like, and I'm probably not gonna do word for word because I didn't go back and read it or watch it. But that sometimes you wonder why if the public wants to know, then get their heinies here. I agree with you. But at the same time, the public elected all of you. I don't think writing just a quick, simple letter or putting it in the Daily Sun or something of that nature would be too much to ask. I know we spoke about, I made a post about the critical race theory and this the sex teachings that the Nebraska Department of Education is wanting to approve. And there were teachers blowing up my page. A very simple, get ahead of the game, we're not okay with this, would have solved a whole lot in our community to wondering where the school and the school board sits on that. So just keep that in mind. And my last thing I want to touch base on is the critical race theory. That letter that you guys showed at the committee of the whole, I didn't read it. That's fine. I haven't seen it published in the paper, like we had maybe mentioned, but I don't know if that's because it needs to be approved tonight or what the yes, the series of it would be, yeah. But I just want to remind you guys that we did have a meeting in this community on the 29th. We had one school board member there. It was open to the public. It went over critical race theory and the CRS, and it was really eye-opening. Some of the things that they're approving or wanting to approve in the first draft are not only, like I said earlier, about elasticity of the female part to first graders, but they're wanting to teach, mom can love dad, but mom can dress as a boy to a first grader. Guys, we know our kids in this community, they're already sometimes confused. There are certain things that we need to put our foot down on this and say, no. That's one of them. Coming from raising my daughter for 4 years, she's here tonight, she probably remembers. In first grade, they had dads come to the school and show their jobs. And I remember Nora came home crying because she didn't have a dad. So just remember that there are certain situations in our community that we shouldn't be putting our kids out there to have to go home and question those things. On the sexual side of it is kids are very curious. I had a little 5-year-old in daycare the other day show his friends his penis. And we had to have a talk about it, and he very innocently said, well, I had a bug bite. I was just showing her my bug bite. If we start teaching 6, 7, and 8-year-olds that feels good, or when somebody else touches it, it feels good, we are just escalating stuff happening in the bathroom at school, stuff happening on the playground, those sort of things. So I urge each of you, if you can get to a meeting with Matt Ennis, I think that's how you say his last name, get there. It's so informational. If you want any more paperwork or any more things to read, I'd be more than happy to give them, as this is really near and dear to me, especially dealing with little ones every day. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Was there anyone else who wished to speak at this time? Okay.
This would be the appropriate time to introduce our new Assistant Principal Athletic Director at the high school, who's joined us tonight for the meeting. We did invite the other new administrator as well, but he already had a commitment, so couldn't be here. But he will be here in a future meeting for us to introduce him. So at this time, I'd like Gus, if you don't mind standing up or waving or something. Mr. Gus Brown, he will be the new athletic director, assistant high school principal. And we're excited to have him. He comes to us from Valentine. We'll be introducing him to the community as the weeks unfold here before school starts, and getting to know him a little better each day. He's been on the job since July 1st, and even a couple days before that, I think, trying to get to know people. So I think you'll find him a very outgoing individual with lots of good ideas for how we can continue to make things operate and even improve how things operate in our activities portion of our school. So, Gus, thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
All right, now we'll move on to the discussion portion of our meeting. First up, we have the ESSER III funding. Dr. Nielsen and Mr. Alexander are going to handle this.
We're going to take our time to go through this fairly in depth, because I think there's, as I've said before, and I said it in the committee of the whole meeting, this is a discussion item, and I want you to have opportunities to ask questions. But I think it's important to understand the timeline of how all this has developed. Up until this point, you just kind of heard me say we had ESSER I, which was the CARES Act funding, ESSER II, which then came to us, and we had to make that go pretty quickly. And now ESSER III has arrived, and it seems like every day we learn something a little bit new about ESSER III, but I think an appropriate timeline would be important for us to highlight in regards to how ESSER III has evolved and what's specifically due this Thursday, and then what's to come after that. So, trying to be as brief but as detailed as I possibly can. May 26th, we had the first ESSER III communication from the Department of Education announcing the first steps in the process. And then June 1st, shortly after that, the announcement from Commissioner Bloomstead announced the total Nebraska share and what each school district would receive. And then we received this email right here, is the email that we received from Commissioner Bloomstead on June 1st, and Beth Wooster on May 26th, explaining the first steps in the process. So it did mention that we have to have a plan for safe return to school, plan for use of the funds and consultation, 20% allocation for learning loss, instructional materials assurances, and the American Rescue Plan, ESSER III, some common assurances and some things we had to do by July 10th. So the application would open July 1st and close by July 10th. So that announcement came.
June 1st, June 10th.
Excuse me, June 1st and June 10th.
Those were the assurances that had to be signed.
Yes. June 1st came, and so we got right in there, took care of the assurances that had to be guaranteed and submitted. On June 4th, we received the first date of notification of the requirements for the return to school plans. In other words, kind of what those were going to entail, and most of this was through webinar, and then we got emails. On June 10th, the assurances were due. We'd already submitted those, indicating that we were interested in partaking in the ESSER III scenario. And then also June 14th, we had a board meeting where we gave you an update as to what was happening. On the 24th, We had the committee of the whole meeting where we presented our safe return to schools plan to the Board of Education and accepted public comment on it at that time, although it was fresh and basically the first rough draft that we had an opportunity to put together. On June 25th, we attended a Zoom meeting with Dottie Hoosman, who is Nebraska Department of Education specialist in charge, one of them in charge of the ESSER III money. So they have different people in the Department of Education who is in charge of administering the plan, reviewing the plans, making sure the school districts are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then also on the backside of it, once the finances are requested, because you have to spend them to get them, once the finances are requested, then they will be responsible for monitoring all that. And so there's a whole list of regulations and monitoring oversight that we have to make sure that we're following as we work our way through this process, because it is a process. The Zoom meeting with Dottie, in that meeting we gained many insights to things we hadn't known specifically at the time before that. And we asked her, what are we obligated to in regards to the CDC, the federal guidelines, state guidelines, all the things that may come to us throughout the course of this next year, and the ESSER funds, because that's a concern we had as well. And her response to that was that she indicated to us that in preparation for the ESSER III plan, the federal and state guidelines will be just that, guidelines. They're just guidelines. So if the CDC comes out with a guideline, like they did over the weekend, it's a guideline. But local districts have control of their safe return to learn plans as long as they address the criteria required. So that list of criteria was prepared for us, or it was given to us. We have to address every single one of those issues in that list of criteria. And then as we get into the school year, anything that comes our way that we may need to deal with is a local decision. July 7th, we had a meeting at the ESU with all area ESU 5 schools, superintendents, principals if they wanted to come. It was mainly superintendents and assistant superintendents. And we shared our plans and talked about them, about each plan and where we were at, and kind of collectively came up with this is where we're at. So if you go to other areas' school district plans, you'll probably see a lot of similarities if you haven't done that, just so you know. We had that meeting, and that was after our committee of the whole meeting, so we got some good ideas and talked about those things and about other things as well in regards to the things we're dealing with on a different level. Since then, since July 7th, we shared the Return to Learn plan with staff, administration, and the public through email, district website, and Facebook. As of 12 o'clock today, we have the following statistical responses. We had 4 comments from staff members. We had 900 hits on our website article. We had 200 link clicks and 10 shares on Facebook. And we had 666 visits from the traffic report on our website. So those are the statistics as to how many people have viewed the plan. 4 responses. Dr. Nielsen, will you please show those responses?
So the 4 responses that we received were actually 4 staff members from our district. The first one said it was a thorough plan, nicely done, thank you for your time. Second one said, let's get back to normal with no mask or regulations, we need to keep moving forward. The third one just said NA, it was not applicable, I guess. And then the fourth one was disagreed with the universal wearing of masks during an outbreak and wanted to let that be an optional choice for families. So those were the 4 comments that we received from staff members. At this point.
And then tonight, we received comments, so we'll have a chance as we get into the action item to digest all those things and talk about them. The next part of the plan involves us identifying areas of which we intend to utilize the fund. And so you understand that just means that after Thursday, where the safe return to school plan has to be submitted, the next part of that is that then we will have to start talking about what we intend to do in terms of utilizing the funds, using the same criteria as ESSER II. So the same 14 or 15 set of items that were in that apply to ESSER III. So we know that. We also know that 20% or $592,640 must go to addressing the learning loss among all students. And the remaining approximate $2,370,564 we'll be talking about the use of it to improve indoor air quality in our future facilities. So that's kind of where we're talking about at this point, utilizing those funds. More details will become available as we target those specific areas. But as you can see, it's a process. It's a step-by-step process that we have to follow that has been given to us in a time frame that it's been a little rushed. Through all three of these, it's been a little rushed. So, but it is what it is. We deal with it. We do our job. We move forward, and we take care of what needs to be taken care of. So, the final step, as I noted earlier, is that the safe in this stage of the process is that the safe return to school plan must be submitted to the NDE by Thursday, July 15th. So we'll be submitting that this Thursday. Any questions?
No other comments except for 4 staff member comments? No other comments?
That's it.
3 really. And
Yeah.
all right, 3, great.
And then Sabrina's comments this evening.
I meant from, anything on the website. We have 900 hits and we only get 4 comments.
Yeah.
The other thing that we didn't have any comments either on our Facebook link, and there's a lot of times where we do have comments on our
Like
Facebook
on the
post.
post itself? Okay.
Yeah, so there were no comments on the post itself either.
And wasn't there a survey with that as well?
Yeah, there was a link, so we've taken you to the plan and then the survey link, which
That's where
where
that came from.
that's where those comments came from. And then, but even on that post, there were no comments either.
Was there a description of what the link was, or was it just a link?
Nope, there was a description that said this was a safe to return to learn plan. Yeah.
I
Yep.
don't have Facebook, so.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it was on our district website as well. So even if you don't have Facebook, you can always go to the district website and we'll try and post things there as well. Okay.
Anybody else have any comments or questions in regards to the ESSER III funding?
And Sabrina, I think probably during the discussion of the safe return to school, I'm not sure we'll hit on all those things that you.
I can email you too, that's fine.
All right, we'll move on to the action portion of our meeting. First up is the safe return plan. Can I have a motion, please?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 approve the safe return plan.
I have a motion by Doris, can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Eric. All right, again, Mr. Alexander and Dr. Nielsen.
Okay, so basically, we're at that point where I think the importance of explaining the ESSER's plan is how it flows right into this topic of discussion and action item is the safe return to school plan. I'll go back and reiterate what I said a year ago, probably at this meeting in July, and that's that at some point, in order to keep things moving forward, we have to find a plan that everybody can live with, and which requires us to come to the middle at some point. And I've shared the time frame with you so you can understand why that's important, that although we may have opinions that are polar opposite, whether it be amongst ourselves or in the community or the state or the nation or the world on COVID and how we handle it, we have to be able to come to the middle in order to create a situation where we can all keep moving forward. So discussion at this point is now up to you, knowing that we have to submit this plan on Thursday. And we've outlined the responses we've gotten, and so that's where we're at. So I turn it over to you for discussion and questions. The plan, I think, is in front of you, and we can certainly talk about those things in it.
Maybe my first point, maybe to address Sabrina's comment on the vaccines. So for example, when they're offered flu shots at school, I believe there's a parental signature waiver, yes, no. I think that would be appropriate. And I don't know if you need to spell it out here or not, but So, I'm just saying, I know when it's flu shot time, you have the option, yes or no, and you have to sign as a parent to say, yes, please give my child a flu shot or not. So,
We can add the part of with permission.
with permission, yeah, I
With
think
parental
that's.
permission. I mean, on to that last, like the district will allow Public Health Solutions to use our facilities to provide free vaccinations to all eligible students and patrons in our community, or eligible students with parental permission.
And maybe we could,
Oh, God.
maybe we could encourage Public Health Solutions to do that on an in-service day at a time where there's students not in school with a whole lot of other kids who, there won't be any bullying or so to speak. I mean, if you want, it would still be easier to go to a school, but do it on a non-school day would be helpful, I think.
When it says patrons, does that mean just anyone in the community? Like we would be opening our facilities for like a vaccine clinic? Is that something that's required by the plan, or is that just something that we're offering?
Just that we'll, I mean. we
Would
did
that, I guess, would that be done on a day that school is closed, so that there's not like members of the public just coming into our schools when there's kids there?
I think that makes the most sense from the standpoint of safety and security. You know, in essence, it's not a lot different than, as Eric referenced, anything that we do right now with flu shots.
Right.
I mean, we offer those immunization clinics I know at preschool and elementary schools, because a lot of times the clinics will come out and do that for free as a service to families to help benefit them, so they don't have to pay the cost of a clinic visit. So, I mean, it would be, in essence, we're trying to accomplish the same thing. We're just providing a location for people to get those services.
I guess my one question would be, when someone turns 18, can they make that decision for themselves without the parent?
No.
So,
That's up to the immunization rules.
okay. Maybe, yeah, that was just one question I had.
I think the legal age of adulthood in Nebraska is 19.
Mhm.
I can't wait to tell my granddaughter.
So since I'm on the comments, one other comment that I have, and then I'll kind of let maybe go around the room, is, Jason, you just mentioned prior in the discussion or information portion when we were going through the ESSER II funding discussion, as far as if there is a state DHM, like there was a year and a half ago, where, you know, basically the state came in and said schools are done for the year, you know, that March. Does that, in what you just said, the opinion of the State Department of Education says, well, that can come down to the local level, but does that still trump anything that happens here? You know, so obviously we receive state funding, we receive federal funding, so does that language still need to be part of this? Or does it truly come down to, as a school board, at a local entity, we have control over that? Or is that still kind of in the air?
It's a great question.
Because I'd hate for us to say we take all of that language out of here, but yet ESSER's is a federal funded, and we get state funds, and then they come back and say, whoa, wait a minute, you guys can't do that, because if we do mandate something, then you're not going to be eligible to receive state funding, period, for our school, which is a huge, you know, revenue source, and or these ESSER funds.
I think it's a very good question, and in the way that I have interpreted everything that we've been told in the Zoom meetings and the webinars and the information that's been given to us, is that because the federal government dispersed this to every state, then the state entities take those over, and then as the state entities take those funds over to disperse them, my opinion is they're more concerned about making sure that what you spend the funds on is actually what's in your plan as compared to what's in your plan. So I'm not convinced that we need to throw the whole statement about paying attention to federal and state guidelines out of the plan. I think we could word it enough to say that consideration will be given, or we will take into consideration all state, federal, or state and federal DHMs as they come about if needed.
You know, because I'm a proponent of the same thing. You know, we look at this and say, okay, well, New York City's an outbreak, but just Nebraska doesn't, so why are we now going to? But yet, on the flip side of that, we get a lot of federal and state funds. And you would hate to be the one entity, school district, that said, nope, we're not paying attention to any of that, and then they pull all of our funding, and then what do we do?
Well, and quite honestly, when I looked at it, I'm comfortable leaving in state and federal mandate because we also state that we are looking at a 10% outbreak, which gives us the local control. So to me, it covers us on that funding, but we still have the local control.
Those are my comments on
I guess to address what Sabrina was asking about on the back page, the last line, the please note. Just out of curiosity, the state and local public health agencies, does that mean Public Health Solutions, Beatrice Community Hospital? Do we need to spell those out, or is that what you mean by public health agencies?
All of the above would be my answer.
Okay,
I mean, that's,
just.
But is it then we take guidance from all of the above, or,
When we pick and choose?
you know, and again, I think we get into, sorry if I keep talking about, or taking control of this, but if we get into a situation where we do have an issue, is it gonna come back to the school board for every, let's say we have the same issue as we did last year at Lincoln Elementary, where we had to close for 2 weeks, then as a board, are we gonna relinquish that decision straight to administration, or are we gonna have special board meetings every time something comes up? So I think that's where you really have to weigh what's the appropriate language there and how we follow that.
The one thing to note about the Safe Return to Learn plan is every 6 months, we have to review it. So it is not a document that we keep in for, 3 years and never look at it again. It's every 6 months, and it is every 6 months until September 1st, 2024. Because that is how long the ESSER III funding is allowed. So that time frame. So that is the thing to know, is every 6 months, and, we can review it a couple times if we need to, or review it all of a sudden we see something come up, we can review it earlier if we needed to as well.
And I guess the thing to keep in mind too, which I keep forgetting and coming back to, is that note at the very beginning that not most of this isn't even activated until we're at 10% of our population, both staff and students, is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
So 250 people would have to be sick with COVID before most of this plan would come into play.
And all at the same time.
Yes.
And if 250 people were sick with COVID, all at the same time, students and staff, I'm gonna tell you, we probably would be closing school because we wouldn't have anyone to teach, or to teach, or to teach. I mean, so that is the other thing, is
yeah.
that would be the piece. It'd be a pretty significant.
Jackie, you said 2024, the plan says 2023.
Okay, so it's 2023.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, that's okay,
thank you.
just wanted to get it right in my mind.
Yes, it's right there, 2023.
Between these 3 packages, keeping all the dates straight up here is.
And maybe this isn't necessarily related to this, but in the cases of students out sick with COVID and or quarantine, whatever that may look like, are staff still required for the online, the dual in-person and online education side of things?
If a student's quarantined, I guess in answer to that, the short answer is yes. I think our staff's prepared at this point on the basis of what we've learned over the course of the pandemic up to now, and understands that they have trained themselves in a lot of Google Classroom type situations, to where if a student is quarantined, we can work with that student through the use of the digitized learning, which isn't optimal. It's not what I'd recommend, but in that situation, it's pretty much what we have.
Will the same rules apply for those students, that they wouldn't, they'd be excused absences if they're in quarantine, and the same thing as previous, or is that all changed?
We would still move forward as previous, as long as they are continuing with that remote option. However, one thing to note is that at the beginning of May, the quarantine rules have changed.
Right.
So even if I've been exposed, I do not need to quarantine. I just need to self-monitor for the time period. So that is nice, because we were able to in May bring back kids who were quarantining, and they never ended up getting sick, and so they just self-monitored for that time period. So it would be the isolation to where if we had a student that was sick, I think those would be, they would be sick, it would be that medical excused, that really would be our piece. Now, if a parent was concerned, because maybe their child was exposed to COVID and they were concerned because maybe they had some other medical conditions, and they wanted to quarantine their child away, or they saw that, you know, we had tremendous outbreaks and what was in their classroom, we will work with parents and families still.
As long as they are, as long as it's from a doctor. I mean, that makes
I agree with that.
a medical doctor. It makes a big difference in terms of what we can excuse legitimately if it's from a medical physician.
No different than any other illness.
Right.
Yeah.
Because again, I think, you know, as we've seen, and it's starting to come back again, this isn't going away. So how do we continue to function in a normal manner with COVID, with influenza, with strep, with everything else that's out there? And I think we're at the point where we just need to move forward and follow those same guidelines. So, you know, if you are sick and it's potentially COVID, then you have a note from a doctor, and that's your excuse, and that's how you know, go from there.
Just to go back to what Eric, you had mentioned earlier, and Jason, you said we could maybe change the wording. On this note, just the way it reads now, the district plans to operate in a traditional learning environment unless there is a state DHM or federal mandate that requires districts to implement the protocols below, or if there's an outbreak with 10% or more. So could we change that language to make it more dependent upon that 10%? And because the way it reads to me, I guess, in here is that if tomorrow there's a federal mandate saying that this is how you have to operate, then that's what it appears we would have to be operating as.
But again,
Can we just change that language a little bit?
if we hit the same as last March, where the state literally said everybody's closing, no excuses, you know, do we have to follow that, or does it now become down to the local entity to decide whether they're gonna follow what the governor's saying or not? That's where I just kind of question that.
Or that it's all subject to a school board vote. You know, they can have a mandate, but still, we assess what's going on here and then call it to a vote, whether we're gonna accept the mandate or not.
I liked your wording earlier, Jason, where you said that consideration would be given to state and federal mandates. Maybe that would just be a better way to word this section.
Or something, or we could assess the local, how do I want to say that? If there were a COVID-19 outbreak, 10 or more % of the student population testing positive, we would assess the situation within our district. Something to that effect. Could we do that? Does that make sense?
Well, the 10% is for our district, but then
Yes.
it's either 10% or state or federal, according to the way it's written now.
And I guess, you know, to me, if the 10% is in there, then what would you how would you change it?
Well, because right now, if tomorrow there's a federal or a state DHM that comes out saying that this is how you have to operate, then we would have to follow that, even though we weren't at a 10% outbreak locally.
I interpret it the same way Aaron is interpreting it.
So it's either state or federal
We're
or
gonna operate
10%.
here, or we're gonna, you know, if either one of those situations occur, if there's mandates, we're gonna follow it, or if there's 10%, I'm interpreting it, I think, the same way you are.
So can we take out the phrase unless there is, or thoughts?
I've prepared something on the essence that this might possibly be some discussion, and so what I have written, I'm gonna read to you, and you can tell me if you think it makes, and we'll have to find the right place to put it in, but we can state, Beatrice Public Schools will take into consideration the recommendations or guidelines of the CDC and local health agencies and determine proper protocol moving forward.
And just completely omit the unless there's a state DHM or federal, is that what you're saying? Omit that part and add.
Are you adding that, or
Yeah,
are you
or
changing
substituting.
something?
Well, I think that's the question, is do you want I mean, I think we can take the word unless out. But my only concern is like you have said, like Eric has pointed out. If we are told by the governor, we're closing every school in the state of Nebraska, I don't honestly know what choice we have.
Right, that's what I'm,
So could we say then, unless there is a state DHM or federal mandate that prevents us from operating in person, or that closes our schools, or can we be
That
very
requires
specific
schools to be
about,
closed.
You think about what we consider.
what's that?
We consider, if the DHM or federal mandate comes out, we can consider it. That puts it back in our court as opposed to automatically taking theirs.
Or could you do the district plans to operate in a traditional learning environment during the 2021-22 school year unless there is a COVID-19 outbreak, which would be 10% or more of the student staff population testing positive, or there is a state DHM or federal mandate that requires school districts to implement the protocols below. You just,
flip it.
yeah, just flip it.
To me, it's the same thing. You're still in the same boat.
But like you said,
Maybe-
we may not have a choice.
Right, that's the only thing, is do you have a choice or not?
I don't wanna,
I guess it just
I don't wanna
depends
give up
on-
any money.
No, I don't either, and I guess it just depends on what we're talking about when it comes to a DHM or a federal mandate. Are we talking about a mask mandate, or are we talking about a mandate to close, or, so I like the consideration word a lot, so what, like, if we said
Yeah,
unless
you
there's
could
a
just
10%
say,
COVID-19
if-
outbreak, and consideration will be given to any state or federal mandates
like
that
that
may be
word.
enacted.
If there's
I like
a
that
state
word.
that requires, we would consider at that point.
I like deciding
Does that make sense?
consideration.
Consideration would be given.
Yes.
So we're not just gonna say, no, we'll be the only district in the state that's gonna stay open, but we're giving consideration to those things, but 10% will be our
I like that.
baseline.
Okay, so,
I'm not willing to jeopardize funding.
No,
No.
no.
I'm not giving up any money.
So here's my question on it. This is what I have written down. I'm going to read this just to make sure that I'm clear. The district plans to operate in a traditional learning environment during the 2021-22 school year unless there is a COVID-19 outbreak, blah, 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 10%. And consideration would be given to state DHMs or federal mandates, period. So then it's consideration, it's not, we will follow. Okay, perfect, because again, I mean, we agree over half our budget is federal dollars. I don't think we could operate
Yep.
without the federal assistance. So that's ouch, yeah, so, perfect,
But that at least gives us a chance to discuss if need be.
100%. Yep,
If, you know, if the federal government comes out and there's other school districts that are saying, you know, we're not following this, and then it gives the school board the chance to discuss and
absolutely.
make the decision locally.
Yep, I like that.
One of the questions I was asked was, in the event of a 10% outbreak, but we, say we're not closing school, or if we would have a mask mandate while school was open, there's nothing in here about fully vaccinated individuals. And that's what I was asked. If we have students and staff that are fully vaccinated, will they be required to follow a mask mandate?
And quite honestly, right now, the CDC says those people who are vaccinated do not have to wear.
Correct. And I know that maybe that doesn't need to be a part of the plan, I'm just saying that that was one of the questions I was asked. The other thing was, I guess at committee of the whole, I had said something about including COVID-19 and any and all of its variants. Did we find out if that was necessary, not necessary?
COVID-19 covers it all.
Okay.
We did ask that.
All right.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Had a
You know, I
couple-
think the difficulty with the vaccinations is we're not requiring people to have proof of vaccination, so I think that's really difficult to administer.
And that's a great question, Lisa. Throughout all these discussions that we've been involved in, nobody's mentioned that. Nobody's asked it. I mean, from the standpoint that I think we understand that, just as Janet said, we're not going to be able to ask for proof of vaccination. I mean, so,
Maybe you can't, but if somebody comes in and says, here's my card, I'm fully vaccinated, are you gonna make my kid wear a mask? I guess that's maybe more so what you're asking.
And that's where I think it's going to be hard to go to do that, just because, I mean, we could ask them to bring in their vaccination card, that would be an option. Yeah,
But maybe that's not a question we can answer tonight, I'm just saying that
but I
I've
think
been asked.
it is something we need to consider.
But
I
that
think
would
we're-
again be difficult for the administration because, you know, you have the vaccination record. They would have to be calling on kids. I mean, I just see that as being hard, but I think it's a good point.
I wonder, would that be covered in this very back note that says plan may change as new guidance becomes available, or, I mean,
And or following the CDC guidelines, which is, yeah.
so that would be something that would be flexible within that.
Because I honestly
Yeah,
assume that if we had a large COVID outbreak per this 10%, we probably would be having a meeting just to discuss next steps. Because that's a fairly significant
Maybe
number.
we wouldn't have a meeting because there wouldn't be enough of us to come.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And you hate to push it off until we need to, but that's probably the case there.
Do you know, did I read that LPS is requiring them to bring in their vaccination records there? Did I read that? Have you seen anything?
I haven't seen anything like that.
Because then things get really hairy because, you know, vaccines aren't approved for
Yeah.
kids younger than 12, so then what do you do with that whole population? And
Yeah, I just think it's very cumbersome to deal with.
Honestly, the vaccines, from where I see us as a school district, is we provide opportunities for families, especially for families that may not have the ability to pay for certain vaccines, but they're required to receive those vaccines in schools. I think that's a good practice, but in terms of us asking for or going on vaccine-proof expeditions, I don't think that's something we want to get ourselves into unless we absolutely have to. And I don't foresee that happening.
But to me, on the back side of that, if a person has chosen to be vaccinated, why are we then asking them to, it's kind of,
And that's where that.
I think I mean, it seems odd that we encourage, but then even though you do, we're still going to have you follow regulations for people. I don't know, but I do know that you have to remember to hang on to the card because you can't get a duplicate. I learned
Well,
that today.
you know, with that,
I know. It's like, wow.
since we're discussing that, you know, under the universal wearing of masks, you know, obviously it says actions occurring during a COVID outbreak. Is there also a note here where, you know, we will follow CDC recommendations, which would then push us into those that are fully vaccinated would not have to, you know, wear a mask or not, or whatever that may be. I mean, that could be a place where, and that's where, if this happens, we have another discussion on what is appropriate at that time.
On that same section for the universal and correct wearing of masks, on our district discipline policy, is there any reference currently to punishment for not wearing masks? Or is it just a straight discipline policy, or, I mean, the way this is worded here, I just think it should be handled case by case, because, for example, if you have students that are experiencing medical conditions or panic attacks due to claustrophobia for the masks, are we gonna punish them the same as, you know, people causing problems in classrooms? I'm just wondering what our current policy is, if there's anything referencing to discipline.
There is no specific, if you look at our handbooks, there's no specific discipline regarding masks. We would handle it like we do all discipline cases, a case-by-case basis. And most of the time, if we know a student has anxiety, we already have a doctor's note about that, and that parent has been in, we had some students where the parents approached us and said, with the doctor's note, this is where my child is at this point in time, or the asthma, the, other things that came up, they maybe have a breathing issue, so they didn't wear masks. And so we took that into consideration this year already, and they had a medical waiver from the wearing of masks, so that was already implemented. But it would be a case-by-case basis.
I guess I can't think of, I don't know specifically off the top of my head how many waivers we had for medical requests this year, but I know there were some. And so we would handle those things that you mentioned, Eric, as the same as we would any other situation regarding discipline, which is already on a case-by-case basis. I think that the wording that we changed to in regards to the state and federal mandate and considering those would pretty much cover us throughout the course of the entire plan. So whatever specific section of the plan we're talking about, with the wording being at the front of all of it, it would apply to that entire situation.
Oh, and actually, Lisa, the contract tracing section does say that we would follow CDC guidelines for isolation and quarantine, which would then probably kick into if you're vaccinated,
Right.
And that's all year, regardless of an outbreak,
Yes.
that section, so that we cover. The cleaning is all year too, thanks for making that change.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Not just
Yeah, we are
during
just
outbreak, we're gonna
cleaning.
clean all year.
Yeah. We're gonna keep our buildings clean.
And then we do agree to add the waiver on the vaccine section.
The vaccinations, that's the with parental permission, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, yep. So I have 2 changes. The first one goes with the 10% and then consideration. So I have that one. And then I have the with parental permission on the efforts to provide vaccinations. Did I miss anything?
I wish we could address leases, we all have to think about that a little bit, and that is something to address, but I do think that that's an important point.
I do too, and I think as more information comes out, that question itself may get answered, or we can continue to investigate that too. And if it says we have to review the plan every 6 months, it doesn't say that we can't review it earlier if we want to.
Exactly.
And it may be something that comes up within the next month, let's hope not, let's hope that that's not an issue, but that we could do maybe at the next meeting, that we would have some idea of how to deal with that, and give you a little bit more time to think about that.
Or even in September as things move forward, and 2 months I think will tell us a lot. So.
But I think we want to address it before rather than after the fact. I think that's what got us into trouble last time. We kind of waited for the crisis, and then I think we need to think about it prior to.
Our next board meeting lands before school starts, right?
Yep,
Right,
that's
so we
August.
would have time between now and maybe the next meeting to maybe kind of research and
And
maybe
find some language that would be
Yeah.
suitable for all of us to include.
Awesome.
Well,
We can look at some of the other district plans too, to see if they have statements in there about vaccinated individual and masking. So we can see if that's a piece, we can send out notes to other superintendents and see what they have in their plan, just so that maybe we like something that they wrote up.
So I know, obviously Jason said this has to be submitted by Thursday, but if any,
But we can change it.
right, but if any changes are made, what's that process? Is it an act of God to submit a new?
I don't think so. Typically, when we make changes in grant applications, we have to do that through an amendment process within the system, the computer itself that's provided by the NDE. But this specific, we've received no guidance that that's what we'd have to do. So I think for this specific
It
plan.
could be a case where it just has to be on file with the district
Right.
and kept up to date and any changes.
Because that wasn't something that was required for the grant funding, was to have this specific vaccine language in there, right? So we could just.
Yep. And so we do have to keep documentation because they have talked to us that they will be coming in and auditing our expenses for ESSERs 1, 2, and 3. So, but they will also be auditing what feedback we got, who did we ask, how do we get the feedback? And so that will be there, and we just have to note everything that we've gone through and everything we've done. So that is one thing that we will just keep adding to our folder.
So do you need an amendment on those
Yes.
changes? So I will make a motion to amend the document as Jackie stated. I'll make it sound good, Danielle.
I'll second
I
that.
have a motion. Who was the second?
Right here.
Aaron. All right. Anybody have any comments or questions on the changes that we've made and how it stands?
So we have a motion to amend the safe return to school plan as discussed and presented. Motion by Doris, second by Aaron.
Motion by Janine.
Motion by Jan.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I know you get us mixed up. Every meeting.
All right, can I have your votes, please? All right, that is approved with 7 votes.
So we still have the full plan and the motion, correct? Yet. Yep.
Just with the changes discussed.
All right, next up, we have the approval of the NDE letter regarding health standards.
Don't we need to vote now on the motion itself? Didn't we just vote for the amendments, but then don't we have to vote on the motion itself?
Amended motion.
I think with you just amending the motion to say,
Oh, yeah.
motion to amend safe return to school plan as discussed and presented, I think we're okay.
Can I have a motion for the approval of the NDE letter?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 approve the NDE letter regarding health standards.
Motion by
Second.
Doris, and second by Aaron. All right, Dr. Nielsen, Mr. Alexander, back up.
Okay, some new information has presented itself since we last discussed this letter, presented to you at the committee of the whole meeting. Again, just emphasizing there's an appropriate process for everything, and I commend you on the process that you're following in regards to communication with the Board of Education as a school board. So the new information that we have is a letter from Dr. Commissioner Bloomstead that we received, I think, yesterday afternoon, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it just said, there was other things involved in it, but it just said, during the June board meeting, I outlined an intention to review the standards drafting process to better engage stakeholders, engage school leaders, and engage others. Though the health education standards were drafted in a similar process as other content areas, it clearly did not serve as well in this instance. This is unfortunate as it has created a still escalating concern, and the board and I are committed to bringing that to a resolution. Over the last week, I've spoken with the governor and many superintendents about the concerns and the next steps for the board. I can share that before August, we will be vetting a second draft to the public release. The second draft will also make clear that managing sensitive health-related topics to be thoughtfully conducted with parental input at a local level, as I know is already a regular process across the state. So Commissioner Bloomstead communicated that there will be a second draft of the health standards coming out. What we're asking for tonight is any final discussions, thoughts, or changes to the letter that we intend to send to the Department of Education. We'll send that out tomorrow, as well as share a copy of it with the local reporting agencies, Quibi and the Daily Sun, and put it on our Facebook and website, all effective tomorrow with your approval.
And in addition, we are still working on creating our own health standards as well. We are not for sure what the second draft will come out with, but we are still in the process of creating our own standards as well.
I think the letter is still good as written, and I think it's important for us to address the draft that's currently out there. And just to address, Sabrina, what you had talked about, in this letter, it does include standards that are proposed that we disagree with. There's 3 different ones for kindergarten students. There's a couple for first grade, second grade, third grade. So it goes into detail about which standards we disagree with, and they're very similar to the ones that you expressed concern with. So
just overall, Jason, being fairly new to these, when the state comes out with these types of standards, how are they relayed to local school districts, and, to what extent are you required to adopt versus adopt your own? I mean, how's that whole process work? I mean, let's just say it's not even this topic. Let's say it's a new math standard, or, whatever that may be. How's that process work?
It's changed a lot over the years from when the standards movement first started, which was probably back in about 1998, 99. And I remember vividly as a 6th grade teacher, was one of the first years we had to write standards for students. And basically what happened is we were provided a copy of national standards. But as we've talked about multiple times, the national standards didn't necessarily reflect what was happening in Nebraska or what we wanted Nebraska kids to know. So we had to take the national standards and then formally come up with a set of standards to recommend to the Department of Education. In the past, that's how we did it. And then we took those standards, then the Department of Education took them and had a meeting with multiple sets of teachers in that field, whether it, for instance, math, like you said, and then they would submit them back out to local districts for approval. And the choice that has always been there is you have the choice to either adopt the state standards or write standards of your own. And in the core curricular areas of math, science, social studies, and language arts, the guiding language has always been that those standards had to be equal to or more rigorous than the state standards that are provided. In this particular situation, because they are not core curriculum areas, they've just said we can write our own standards. So our plan obviously is to work with these standards, look at the second draft, because we know we don't agree with the first draft, so look at the second draft, see what changes have been made, and then continue the process, as Dr. Nielsen said, of working with some other area schools to come up with a set of standards that everyone here can agree with, share those with the public, and then come to a place where we're all comfortable.
So there is still local entity control to some extent of these.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I'm just curious on how that whole process.
And it's every 7 years that the standards are revised. So for example, right now, they're also going through the standards revision for English language arts, which I've looked at, made a suggestion to the state, and it was very nice that I made my suggestion to the state, and they emailed back and said, hey, your suggestion has been noted, and that word that you asked for is being removed. So I thought that that's fantastic. But it's nice to have a process in place, because those English language arts standards we usually adopt, the math, social studies, and science, we usually adopt as they are, because it would take me a lot of time to really rewrite and to revamp and to make as rigorous or more rigorous.
And typically the educational service units in the area, for instance, ESU 5 here in Beatrice would, in the past, like with math, would host math teachers from the area to work on those math standards. in education you have all sorts of lingo, but we called it unpacking the standards. So we would unpack the national standards, repack the national standards, or the local standards to be what we want to be, and then submit them to the Department of Education to be forwarded out for a set of Nebraska standards across the board. So that's kind of how that whole thing has worked. But it's changed over the years, because at first we just started with language arts, English language arts in 1998, and then as those standards were adopted, then came along the math standards, I think, and then after the math standards, science standards, and then it was decided, once the science standards was done, it was time to go back and do the language arts standards. So we did that, and then finally we're at a point where we're starting to see progress on coming up with social studies standards and get those done, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, on, in the letter where it says, for instance, the proposals include standards providing for, and you have the list here. Is there a reason why you just chose these and not the entire Nebraska sex standards for 2021?
Well, no, there's no specific reason outside of the fact that those were the ones that, as we heard back from our teachers and the people that would be responsible for teaching these, and as we met with administrators and went through them, we felt like those were the ones that were probably, we were least comfortable with, but no specific reason why those are listed there. Anything that you would add
I
to that?
think
Dr.
more
Nielsen?
so just to give examples of
Right.
this is, and then there's a lot more, absolutely. And
Right, I mean, this,
I think you could have made a 5 to 10 page letter.
because I have every one of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is we could have made a 5 to 10 page letter, we could have just attached the whole document and said, here,
We disagree.
it's all,
I mean,
we disagree with all of it.
In entirety, yes.
Mhm.
I mean, and as we write this, our new health standards, my question is, what's wrong with them now, as they currently are? I mean,
There are some topics that are not included, for example, vaping. Vaping is not, I mean, there's a lot, there are some things that change. So those are the things, we wanna just make sure that we're up to date with the current pieces that are happening in our community, in our world, just so that, our students are aware of the effects of those pieces. So it really is just adding some of those extra pieces and making sure that, we're all on the same page.
what is the time frame for writing our new health standards, and will that be approved by the board as well then?
Yeah, we will put it out for public review, and so we'll put it out to all stakeholders so that they will have access to it. We'll use the same format, so it'll be on the website, it'll be on Facebook, and we'll use the survey. But what we will do is we'll look at this whole year. We will continue to teach what we currently are teaching. We will look at this whole year to take the time so that we spend time with it, we get the feedback that we need, we adjust things that we need to adjust, and then we will fully adopt them for the 22-23 school year.
I think it's also important to recognize, I was at the discussion with Matt Ennis, and it really opened my eyes. I recommend that you, if you can attend one of his seminars, he's a brilliant guy. A lot of people have approached me about the critical race theory, and if you look at the Nebraska standards, it's actually in the standards. They have changed, and that's why I'm asking why these are discussed here when there's other topics here that have that critical race theory inside of the standards. So I just ask that we all be aware of that as we write our new health standards, that I'm not really in favor of any of what they're proposing now.
And I think to emphasize that, I wasn't able, I had other commitments that night, so I couldn't go, and I didn't find out about it until the day before. But I was out of town on vacation, to be honest with you, which I think a lot of people do during the summertime, so I wasn't able to make that. But I would like to, I heard it was recorded somewhere, and I haven't seen that, so I could watch it that way, if it were possible. It's not that I wasn't interested in the content of the meeting, it simply came down to family time, to be honest with you. So I think that it's a topic that we have to continue to monitor. It's a topic that obviously you know, there's a lot of discussion about. I think we're going to have to take the time as a Board of Education to educate ourselves on it as well. So you, as a citizen, always have the whereabouts to follow the process that's been laid out for us to communicate with the Board of Education what we like and what we don't like. And then, I mean, you can do that on your own as well. So the letter that we send as a collective whole, as a Board of Education, where our power comes from in open session is to send that letter as a collective whole to follow the process that's been laid out for us, so you as a Board of Education have your voice heard. But your voice as a citizen is always available to be heard as well.
I just sent you all the August meeting format, so you all are aware of the next meeting in an email
Okay,
for the next one.
will that be here?
It's in February.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Anybody else have any comments or questions in regard to the NDE letter? All right, hearing none, can I have your votes, please? That is approved with 7 votes. All right, next up, policy 5575 and AR. Can I have a motion, please?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 reaffirm policy 5575, student fees, and AR 5575.
Motion by Doris, can I have a second, please?
Second.
By Aaron. All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Nope.
All right, anybody have any questions they want to ask or comments? All right, move the motion, or votes. That is approved with 7 votes. And I have a motion for policy 5585.
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 reaffirm policy 5585, anti-bullying.
Motion by Doris, can I have a second?
Second.
All right, anything you want to add to that?
Just a simple explanation for the audience and new people on the board. Again, this is a little bit different than the student fee hearing policy, but state statute 79-2, 137, which I think we have a link to. It's not important, but just wanted to provide it for you. If you want it, you can find it under the Nebraska legislature. Requires an annual review of the district's anti-bullying policy as well. The anti-bullying policy, as all policies, I would just remind you, are reviewed by legal counsel to make sure that they are statutorily appropriate. So this policy has been reviewed by legal counsel and represents appropriate policy to meet the statute requirement 79-2, 137.
Comments or questions? Hearing none, can I have your vote, please? All right, that is approved with 7 votes. Next up, can I have a motion for the first student contract?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 approve the addendum to the contract with First Student.
Motion by Doris, can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Janet. All right.
Basically, we've talked about this for a long time, that in previous meetings, we'd be presented with an addendum to the first student contract, which we've approved in a previous meeting. Now it's time to approve the addendum, which represents the pricing proposal from First Student. And as you know, Mid-States was purchased by First Student, so they're no longer Mid-States Transportation Service. First Student Transportation Service will be providing our route transportations this year. And as we discussed also in those meetings, we've been looking at ways to reduce the amount of cost to the district that entails. So we've eliminated 2 routes. So instead of offering 14 routes, we'll offer 12 routes this year, which represents a savings of the district of $87,383 for the year. So basically, 2 routes almost equates to $100,000 in savings for the district, and I think we can do that. We're also working with First Student to provide some larger buses. So instead of 52 passenger or 55 passenger buses, they've agreed to bring 70 passenger buses, which will help make sure that if they're we have students that move in to certain areas or whatever the case may be, we'll have a little extra room to provide them. So we've tried to do everything we can, and that is what the addendum is all about.
Will there be, Jason, will there be any restrictions on bus riding like we had to do last year, or are we back to kind of normal operations on?
Pretty much.
Aside from the routes, but
Pretty much normal operations. The routes will be conducted the same way. Everything will be the same. With the transition to first student, we incorporate some new technology. It'll be nice. Have a GPS system and a Zonar system that will have global positioning satellite service or GPS availability, which we've never had before. And also, we're working on passes for students that eventually we'll be able to log them in, and we know they're on the bus, and log them out when they get off the bus. So lots of neat things involved in that, but everything's pretty much the same.
All right, any comments or questions in regards to the first student addendum? All right, can I have your votes, please? That is approved with 7 votes. That ends the action portion. We'll move on to administrator's report. Superintendent report, Mr. Alexander.
Okay, several things to talk to you about this evening or update you on. The first and foremost, the preschool expansion grant report. After many more attempts to pull a rabbit out of our magic hat, so to speak, we had one applicant for the preschool expansion classroom. However, that person was under contract, as we said, could likely be the possibility at this time of year. So therefore, we did interview that for the position, and we had one other inquiry, but it never went any further after that. So we'll have to be notifying the state that regrettably, we will have to decline the funding for the expansion grant on this go around, but we'll be reapplying for it next year. And hopefully we have that information in a more timely manner than we did this year, so we can pursue an applicant, which I think hopefully, thanks to people in the audience, we were able to get a person who is interested in coming to Beatrice, and we'll pursue that in the coming year. The 6 pence grant that you were updated on at the June committee of the whole meeting was submitted today, so the submit button was pushed, and we'll be notified by August 4th on the successful application of that, whether we get the money or not. So plans are in the process of being ready to implement 6 pence here in Beatrice, which I can say from experience in previous districts, that's an exciting program to put into place for our community. It's really something that, as it grows, which it'll take some time to grow, you will definitely see some nice changes from. A quick shout out to the tech department. We had a technology committee meeting the other day, and literally we had 4 pages of items after we got done with the update. So I'll try and be brief in telling you about some of the things that are the summer progress that our technology committee has been up to. Cheryl, James, Ryan, David, Jason, and Mitch from the ESU, and Cheryl and James obviously are from here, and a few volunteers, including our custodial department, have made tremendous strides in our technology world. Everything from imaging every computer in the district, so physically putting our hands on every single computer in the district and re-imaging them, to installing projectors and sound bars in every classroom, which we're still not completely done with that because we have to wait on brackets that come to us. And information has been sent out to parents about online payments, where parents can now use credit cards to pay for whatever they want to pay for, whether it's student lunch or supplies that maybe they need here at school. They can pay for those using credit cards, which is the first time the question will be asked: can credit cards be used for entry into activities? And not at this time. We haven't gone that far yet, but hopefully we'll be able to get there. We set up new staff with working phones and laptops and phones, switched to Google login. High school clocks have all been replaced, so hopefully they'll now work and be able to tell the appropriate time. We've installed fiber to the football field, which we've never had before, so we can continue the process of live streaming any games that would be held out at the House of Orange, or any activities for that matter that are held out at the House of Orange. We've worked with Diode to schedule new bell systems being put in place. The high school gym, there's been new wiring in place for there for streaming. Security cameras, we still have security upgrades we need to make. We're working on currently identifying or implementing new ID badges, which will be used from everything from entering the building to logging into the copiers, to logging into different devices that we can. So that's all been worked on. And then in the front office, we are implementing new software devices that will help us in all of the handbooks, applications, live stream or streaming, all the applications and all the paperwork that we have to go through in the central office. So that's all being worked on as we speak. And then also, as we mentioned tonight, the one-to-one device agreements and insurance for students will be going out to parents. The goal there is to get it mailed out here in the next couple weeks prior to the 1st of August. So the process of getting computers, one-to-one Chromebooks checked out to students will go very, very quickly. So that's our goal. But I just wanted to say a special thanks to the tech department because they have put in a lot of hard work this summer trying to get all of these things implemented, which isn't always easy. So thank you to them. Some good news in the donation front. Last Thursday was a great day for our school at Beatrice Public Schools. We will make more public announcements in the future when we're ready. We still have some unpacking of things to do, but at this time you should know of two very specific generous donations that were made to us. Paul Garnett and Tracy Froscheiser donated a semi-truck full of sporting goods equipment, which amounts to approximately somewhere between $80,000 to $90,000 worth of sporting goods equipment. Most of it is volleyball standards, nets, referee stands, or Coliseum-style basketball hoops that you roll into a gymnasium, and they raise and lower as high as you want them to. So that's really nice to think about in an elementary gym coming to you in the near future. So those are all things that we're going to be able to put to use, but a very, very generous donation. So thanks to Paul and Tracy for that. And then a donor that wishes to remain anonymous, or a set of donors that wishes to remain anonymous, donated $10,200 to the purchase of new weight room equipment on last Thursday. I think we got the notification late Thursday afternoon. They came into the weight room Thursday morning, visited with our coaches that were in there that have basically lived there all summer long. So hats off to them, and they agreed to donate $10,200 to other needs in the weight room. And then just a quick update on the high school scheduling. In speaking with Mr. Suter last week, the change to block scheduling and providing all necessary components from a variety of classes to the skinnies that you heard about is predominantly complete. The only snag is that students were out before the schedule was completely done. So there's going to be a lot of communication that has to take place in the coming weeks. I don't know how many people use Twitter, but our high school uses Twitter quite a bit, and they did send out a Twitter note that students would be or counselors would be in contact with students as they come back. So we just ask for everybody's patience as that process works itself through as well, and we get students scheduled. Last two things, the facility update. We were planning on honestly presenting a business plan to you tonight. Johnson Controls was planning to be here to talk to you about the facilities that we've been working on. There were just some things that we didn't feel comfortable with, so we decided to hold that until August. So at the August meeting, we will be talking about, pending all items are ready, we'll be presenting you with a business plan from Johnson Controls for the discussion of facilities and new facilities. So that's coming in August. And then finally, as is custom, there will be no July committee of the whole meeting. And I think that's it, unless there's questions for me.
The next regular meeting of the Board of Education will be August 9th, 2021 at 7 p.m. in the Administration Building. There will not be a committee of the whole meeting in July. An agenda for the meeting that isn't going to occur will be kept continually current and readily for public inspection. So at this moment, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Can I have your votes, please? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.